To order, start recording. You did, thank you. I have a statement I always have to read at these Zoom meetings. Bear with me. I'll do it as fast as I can. This meeting of the Noank Zoning Commission will take place through Zoom remote meeting technology. My name is Rick Smith. I'm chairman of the commission. The host of the meeting is Larry Dunn. He's an alternate zoning commission member. Anyone speaking? It's a regular meeting, so there will be very little of that. Should state their names prior to speaking each time. Of course, that goes for commissioners too. The participants in this meeting will be the commission members and staff, persons with applications for architectural design review, if we call on them, and there are no such applications tonight, and the commission's counsel if he should join us. At the discretion of the chairman, with the concurrence of the commission, elected alternate members of the commission may participate during old business during discussion of the short-term rental issue. Participants who would like to comment on an item or share a screen item should indicate by using the raise hand icon or by raising your hand visually in front of your screen. You'll be called on by the chairman. Mute your microphones unless called upon. That's a help to us. To offer a motion or a second, commissioners will physically raise their hand, be acknowledged by the chairman. When we vote, I will call on people by name to make sure that the video picks up the fact that they're voting yay or nay. The public can participate in the meeting as observers and at the start of the meeting during the general comments section of the agenda, at which issues not on the agenda can be raised for future commission consideration. All participants, including commissioners and staff, must identify themselves before speaking each time they speak. I will try to do better for that myself because I'm the worst offender. Members of the public can also submit comments by writing to the commission after the meeting for consideration on any item discussed tonight, and that email address is nfdzoning@gmail.com. Finally, a recording of tonight's meeting will be posted on the Town of Groton's website within 7 days of the meeting. It's a YouTube channel. The link to it is in every agenda, so you can easily get access to see the entire presentation if you want to go through it all over again. Okay, I'm going to call the roll now. Speak when I call your name so that the record shows that you're here. Art Tanner.
Nip Tanner, here.
Okay, Nip is here. Beth?
Here.
Beth is present. Dana Oviatt?
Here.
Okay, Blake Powell?
Yep.
Okay, and I'm Rick Smith. So that's your 5 voting commission members. Also, Larry Dunn is an elected alternate member, and he will participate during the short-term rental issue, as will Lynn Marshall if she joins us. Okay, now general comments for issues not on the agenda. Does anyone from the public want to speak on a subject that is not on our agenda to alert us to something arising that we may need to know about? You'll have to speak to, you'll have to raise your hand. You know what, Larry, we're going to have to unmute the audience. Anybody who doesn't have a picture up there, we can't see them. So Agnes and Sylvia, I'm doing. Greg Hanover, Stanley White. We can see Keith and Frank Boland. We can see Mark Berry. We can see Lynn Anderson. So does anybody want to speak on an item not on the agenda? Larry, how come I can't unmute people? There we go. Okay. No, it keeps.
No, I asked them to unmute. They have to unmute themselves.
Oh, when I hit it, it seems like they, before I could get the commissioners unmuted by myself. Okay, not hearing anyone and not seeing them, and they aren't on visual. So if they don't unmute, I guess we're going to go with. Okay. So we're going to go with no comments during that section of the agenda. Okay, the application to be discussed tonight is the application of DACO Inc. on behalf of the Town of Groton for a coastal site plan review and a special exception for beach sand replenishment at the Esker Point Beach. Review of commissioners' concerns and considerations of approval, denial, or approval with conditions. To recap for anyone in earshot that isn't aware, this issue has been the subject of a public hearing that began on December 15th and ended on January 19th. We closed the hearing at that time. We're now in the mode of a business meeting deciding whether to approve, deny, or approve with conditions. And where we left it at the last meeting is that commissioners would submit a list of their concerns. I would put them all together, get them back out to the commission, and in advance of this meeting, put them on the website, which is the link that you get at through our agenda. So that's been out there since about a week ago. And that will be the basis of our discussion tonight on this agenda item. So having said that, commissioners, would you like to discuss the list? Add, subtract, modify, just discuss, ask questions of one another? There are a few inevitable typographical errors and things like that that we can clean up as we go. Nothing that I saw that made something so complicated or misled people. So I think that's the document we ought to just move forward from. So does anybody want to comment on those concerns? I'm going to unmute the 5 commissioners. Okay, I hit ask to unmute, and Dana and Beth, there you go, and Blake, good. Now we can all speak with one another. So what's your pleasure on the list of concerns? Okay, I thought it was pretty comprehensive. It covered a lot of areas and seemed to track pretty well with the kinds of things we had heard in the public hearing. We had set out to have that list to have a basis to decide which one of those 3 ways we might vote on this. Obviously, the 2 easy votes are approve it or deny it. You could just do that with a motion, a second, a discussion, and a vote. The more complicated one is to approve with conditions. Because if everybody's happy with the list of concerns and they want to pursue a motion to approve with conditions, then we move to discussion of the conditions. So how do the commissioners feel about that? Dana?
I'll take a stab at it, or get it going at least. I've been trying to think about this for the last 2 or 3 weeks and have it make sense logically to me. And I was thinking if the application had come to us 60 years ago, and we had also been asked or been told as a result of replenishing all the sand over the years that it would result in significant erosion, I don't think 60 years ago we ever would have passed it. So I'm uncomfortable passing it, obviously, or approving it, but I also feel really uncomfortable about discussing the conditions with which you could approve it, because I'm certainly not an expert. And to my knowledge, I don't think anybody else on the commission is an expert either. And so, to approve with conditions is to kind of approve blindly what we think would result in essentially what we don't want at all, which is more erosion into the bay. And so it kind of logically comes for me to deny the application, even though I hate to say that, because I'm a big advocate of public access to the water. And I'm wondering what's going to happen if we deny this application, and what happens over the next 5, 10, 15 years to the beach if that fails to get sand reapplication.
Okay, others? Blake?
So I agree with what Dana's saying there. I'm, very sympathetic to the property owners who, are being impacted by this in particular. Obviously, over the past 60 years or whatever it is, town brings sand in, and it ends up in their, essentially their backyard, and has a negative impact on their use of docks and things like that. Clearly, though, maintaining public access is important in Groton in particular, I think. So this application does a little of both. The parts that I'm still a little bit uncomfortable with, they're from the questions and answers that we've had so far. One thing is, why don't we plant more seagrass? And in particular, why don't we plant more seagrass now, wait for it to take hold before we bring in more sand? I'm not sure I fully understood the answer that we got, but the answer was it wouldn't make a difference, it sounded like. And then there's the big issue of this application is only addressing one part of that beach. So the application in and of itself has mitigation measures, the additional seagrass, which wouldn't be immediately effective, and the fencing, which is only seasonal. But those are both good things, and I'd like to see that happen. But what happens with the rest of the beach? So it's a little hard to come to a conclusion when we're just addressing part of the problem, I guess, and knowing exactly what the impact is going to be on the property owners.
Okay. Beth or Nip? Beth?
I'm maybe reiterating what I had already indicated in my list of concerns, but I have to echo what Dana and Blake have said. I mean, the town has, this is the second time now in 3 years that the town has come and asked to put more sand in that spot. And yet what they provided to us in they haven't done a topological survey, so they really can't speak to the impact that the sand that leaves the beach has on the tidal area, anything below the high water mark, or what happens in front of the Noble Avenue residences. Likewise, the issues with the grass, if I think we do need more planted, but I think it needs to be planted and established before they bring any sand in here. I am also sympathetic, like Dana said, to the fact that this is the only public beach in Groton. However, just because it's a beach doesn't mean that necessarily volleyball has to be played there, or at least not at this time. And we didn't even hear really that volleyball couldn't continue to be played there if they didn't get the sand. The sand that they want to bring in is the finer grain sand, when what they told us is necessary for retention is the coarser grain sand. So I understand that may not be beneficial for, playing volleyball or the most beneficial substance, but ultimately the issue here, the paramount issue to me is the coast itself, as opposed to incidental recreational activities, because you can still have recreational activities at the site. You can still have, sunbathing, maybe some wading in the water or whatever happens down there. But until we see some real action on the part of the town to prevent further erosion or to encourage sand retention, and until we see an actual plan from the town that shows what's going on there, I do not feel comfortable in approving it, even with conditions. I can't, again, because the condition that I would need to hear is that the grass is already established and that they've actually done some study such that they know what is going on, and they haven't done it.
Yep.
I agree with all of the commissioners that have spoken so far, particularly Beth. I think she has nailed the key points of what we're faced with. I would just add that I think there's a basis for denial that we haven't discussed before. there's a section in our regs, 15.5.3.g, which talks about control anytime there's excavation or deposit of fill on property. And if you read the words in that section, what is key is after any activity which disturbs the existing earth, there has to be steps taken to prevent erosion within a reasonable amount of time after the activity has occurred. And specifically, it says suitable ground cover will be planted and grown in an erosion-resistant condition upon the completion of the filling, excavation, or removal operation. And so the basic goal, anytime there's excavation or filling, is to make sure you end up with a non-erodible condition. And clearly what we're faced with here, I mean, we're not obviously not going to ask the grass be planted on top of the beach so it doesn't, but we need to, any activity that results in significant filling in the future needs to be accompanied by actions that are taken to prevent, preferably as a minimum, control future erosion. And we had a lot of discussion over what that might be in the public hearing. But my understanding of what was proposed was there'd be a few more, well, not a few more, but 1,600 or 3,000 more beach grass plants put in place. There were, I believe, 1,600 put in place last summer. If anyone's been to look at them, clearly there's a hope that over the next few years, they will grow to the point where they can provide significant erosion control, but they're not there yet. And planting additional ones this summer will be a good step in the right direction longer term, but will not be a help over the next few years. And I'm not an expert, so I don't know how many years a few years is, but I know it's not immediate. So somewhat similar to what Beth said, I'm comfortable with saying, no, the application as presented is not acceptable, but I would be very interested in the town coming back with a proposal which provides long-term fixes, both in the volleyball area, which is only a portion of the beach, and for the rest of the beach. And I think in the public hearing, there were ideas teed up about what could be done to provide long-term erosion control, not only for the volleyball courts, but for the whole beach. And I think it would be helpful if the town isn't comfortable with doing that, if, at some point, if the town comes forward with something, I think the commission needs to have its own expert to look at what's being proposed. But that would be premature to talk about that at this point. But as I said, I would be comfortable with denying the application as submitted for the reasons that I outlined and other commissioners have articulated.
Okay, then my turn. I actually agree with most of the concerns that I've heard from all four of you. Where I disagree is with the conclusion. I look at the scope of this work and say it's not enormous, and the improvements that have been made and our opportunity to add conditions, much like the ones that were at the last page or page and a half of the list of concerns, in my view, is a way to deal with this particular application as a self-contained unit. I also, and you'll note if you read those conditions, they kind of evolved from comment list of concerns from others, as well as myself, there are ways at getting at the longer term issues that don't require us to say no to this fairly narrow proposal. I think the applicants have made a good faith effort to try and revise as they heard comments in the public hearing. And we also have a lot of latitude to have Bill work with the applicants and say, well, okay, drainage is a big issue and you've tried to make some improvements, but we want you to go back and do more in that regard and use best available engineering techniques to really minimize drainage, much more than cleaning out an existing swale to minimize the obstruction in those areas. It may require some other type of engineering solution to allow for water to enter the bay, but minimize the sediment that goes in. I think all of those are able to be accomplished if we put our heads together on a list of permit conditions. I understand Dana's point about he'd be much more comfortable if we had, we're not the experts in that regard, but we are the 5 elected zoning commissioners, and we're supposed to make a decision based on what we heard in the record. And as a judge, we can look at the record and see what the recommendations were and decide what kind of a permit condition we should have. And again, my kind of a condition would be, Bill, work with the applicant, this drainage thing or whatever, the grass thing is a big issue. We want you to use best technology, make them do it. And that would be a permit condition. If you do it that way, you allow the town to continue to use their beach for the purposes that it has come to be used by. Someone in the public hearing made the observation that when this beach was designed, nobody had thought about beach volleyball. And I think a permit condition, one that I put in was, okay, you got your permit for 500 yards this year and you can put it on the volleyball courts and do all the other things you're required to do. But long-term, you need to look at putting the volleyball courts somewhere else. And the way I characterize that is it's not really beach volleyball, it's sand volleyball. For example, they could put 8 courts at Pequannock Plains Park in a corner that is relatively unused, build a barrier around the edge and have sand and put up nets, and you'd have just as good an environment, other than the fact that when you got hot and sweaty, you couldn't take a dip. I don't know if that's a solution that would satisfy anybody, but in a long-term way of thinking, maybe the better solution is to not do beach volleyball there if every 3 years you have to put fine-grained sand there and part of it's going to wash or blow into the cove. So the concerns, it's amazing that we all kind of have a similar level of concerns. We care about the town's beach and preserving and allowing it to be used as a beach. And we care about what's been happening to the neighbors, the Noble Avenue neighbors in, as Nip points out, their backyard. But I don't see denial of this permit as solving those sand problems at Noble Avenue. Those are done 50 years ago. The other condition I would argue for strongly is, I mean, I understood Keith Nielsen said, yeah, DEP doesn't like to approve dredging. Well, I worked for them for 33 years. Yeah, they don't like to allow dredging, but it doesn't mean they won't, because it's a policy. It's not a law and it's not a regulation. Maybe we need to go back at them, we meaning the neighbors and the town, and that would be the condition. Go back to DEP and fight much more hard. Move that sand somewhere. You know, if you put it back in the water at the beach, it's just going to wash back in front of the houses. That's not a solution. If you put it up farther on the beach, okay, you have more of a sandy beach, and maybe you build a wall there and people want to go in the water, walk down steps and go in the water, but the sand is up on the beach. I don't know. And as Dana points out, we're not the experts in trying to design those things, but we're the elected commissioners that are supposed to point the finger in the direction of the solution we'd like to have accomplished. And then let the zoning officer and the applicant's expert put their heads together to find a technical solution to it. So I'm in favor of approval with conditions. We haven't really gotten to the conditions yet, but that doesn't mean I'm unsympathetic to the concerns of the town for their beach or the concerns for the Noble Avenue residents for their waterfront. It just means I think this particular proposal can move forward with with conditions that we approve. Nip?
Rick, I understand where you're coming from. I appreciate that. However, I am not comfortable with the idea that we are qualified to craft appropriate conditions. It's a very technical subject. We've heard some information from the applicant and the applicant's experts. We decided not to retain an expert of our own to provide comments to us and even suggestions about good solutions to the problems. And lacking that, I am very reluctant to make myself one of the 5 people who would identify and specify appropriate conditions. I'm also reluctant to delegate Bill to do that. I have a lot of respect for Bill. The years that I've worked with him, I think he's an expert on land use. I do not know that he has an expert level background in the kinds of issues we're faced with here. So for us to ask him to work with the applicants to come up with the best solutions, I'm not sure that's an appropriate step.
Okay, Beth, Blake, or Dana? Beth?
I have just 2 comments to what you said. You indicated that we should require the applicant to use the best technology to prevent the further loss of sand. I mean, the applicant never told us what the best technology is. Did they? I didn't hear that. And so, I mean, it's not for us to make that determination as to what the best technology would be. That's for the applicant to show us, but they didn't. That's point 1. And point 2 is you indicated that it's up to us to point the finger in the direction of the solution that we want to have accomplished. But again, I really don't think that's what our role here is. Our role is to either approve or deny the application. And if we approve it, we can approve it with conditions. But what is to be accomplished is what is the town is bringing forth for us. I mean, it's up to them to do their job and put it all out there. And honestly, I really don't feel like they did that. I feel like there were studies that could have been done that haven't been done. I feel like the things that they told us that they were going to continue to do are the things that they have done in the past, and yet the sand continues to go. So I'm really uncomfortable approving with conditions when we don't have, they didn't present anything to us in the form of a study with proof that just adding more grass and fixing the drainage pipe and putting some snow fencing up, that's going to stop it, because those things haven't stopped it in the past. And even though it's only 500 yards, it's, again, there's always going to be the needle that, you know, or the hair that broke the camel's back, or whatever the term is. I mean, another 500 is another 500 today, and then 3 years later they'll be back asking for another 500, and then another 1,000. I mean, if they want it, they really have to come up with a plan that's going to prevent the further further increase to the problem that has been created here. Because when I look at these regulations, and I did I did look at some of them, what they define as adverse impacts on coastal resources, including degrading natural erosion patterns through the significant alteration of littoral transfer of sediments in terms of deposition or source reduction. I mean, I think, I don't really know exactly what that means, but to me, it sounds like if we put sand here, is that degrading the natural erosion? And it seems to me that it is, because it's increasing it to a point where it wasn't before, and it's getting out of control. And the motion that we're supposed to make is to say that the application is consistent with the applicable goals of section 22A-92, but it's not, because it's just continuing on with the degradation of what's already there. I just don't feel that there's any condition they could put at this point without getting, without having further studies about what they're doing what happens to the sand when it is placed in that area, this type of sand.
Okay, Blake or Dana?
Oh,
Blake?
I just, Beth touched on what I was going to say, but I certainly don't view it our responsibility to re-engineer or redesign this and tell them what we want them to do differently. I'd be very open to approving it with conditions as long as we had very objective, definable conditions, and I'm not too sure that we do. I'm not comfortable with leaving it up to Bill to have to interpret what would be a better drainage or what would be more mature grass, or if it's too vague like that, it doesn't do the applicant or anybody else any good. So unless we have very specific, objective, definable criteria that we want to attach to this, I'd be real uncomfortable leaving it as wide open as the examples that you were presenting, Rick.
Dana?
Dana Oviatt. Yeah, I agree with Blake and Beth. If the conditions are too specific, I'd be really uncomfortable, because I don't feel comfortable being knowledgeable enough about making a specific stipulation about what should be there and what shouldn't. I have some great ideas, and if you get me in a room with a drink, I can tell you exactly what's going on, but not for the purpose of this. And yet, if it's too generalized, we're starting to use terminology like what you said, Rick, best technologies, and I'm not sure what best technologies are. So, I'm uncomfortable with both options, and I don't know if there's a middle ground in producing a set of conditions.
Okay, let me try and take some of those in sequence. The best available technology thing was my language. You have to.
Hey, Rick, not to interrupt, but I can't hear you all of a sudden. You're very, very muffled.
Oh, I know why. So I had paperwork on the microphone. Hear me now? No? Blake? Yes, everybody's thumbs up. You can't? Huh. Interesting. I'll shout. First point, appreciate this, that as chairman, and I interact with Bill frequently, I kind of privy to the evolution of what's going on in this whole application. But since information that comes in after the public hearing can't be considered because it's not on the record, yeah, I'm somewhat limited in how much I discuss it. The reason I use that language is after the hearing was closed, the applicants brought forth a solution on drainage that is much more aggressive. And I'm comfortable having them work with Bill, and Bill say, okay, what you're showing me makes sense, and the goal of the commission is to solve the drainage problem, and that seems like a viable solution. I can't tell you what it is without violating the rules. It is somewhat of a trust me, but all of these things in zoning are we're elected from the populace. We're not elected for any expertise. And sometimes we just have to make judgment calls. I mean, I kind of see the way this is going, and I don't ever disagree with the will of the majority. I support it. But on that point, there's more there that I think could be part of a solution and still allow the town to take care of their beach the way they want to. But unfortunately, the details have to remain out of the picture. When I said pointing the finger in the direction of the solution, I meant on the major things. I mean, grass, berms should be more of that. More plantings, maybe plant and wait. All of those were in our list of concerns that came from one person or another. And that's what I mean by pointing the finger in that direction. They say they'll do studies now as a permit condition. I wish they had done some also after 2017, but I'm not ready to deny an application because they didn't do everything they could have. I guess without belaboring it further, I'm going to stand on my point earlier that I will vote for pursuing a permit approval with conditions, but I'll also live with the majority vote. We've taken about a half an hour on this subject, and the only thing to decide is to pursue approval, denial, or approval with conditions. So if we don't have any more comments on list of concerns, it's begging for a vote, or I'm sorry, for a motion from someone to decide on how we pursue this. Beth?
Before we do have a motion, if they've come forward with something, is there anything in the time frame that we're allowed that we could bump it out and they are allowed to present that to us, or no?
You mean in terms of the further information? Not since we've closed the hearing, no. I mean, I
Okay.
wish they had come forth with this while we're still within the hearing, but they didn't. The question is as frustrating as that is, does it lead me to denial or not? And I say no. I think if we use our words right, we can leave it to Bill and the applicants to DACO essentially to figure out a best way forward. Whether it'll be successful, I have no idea. This project, like most, are replete with you use your best judgment. And I'm talking about the experts now, Keith and assistance from Frank Boland. They use their best judgment on what they think will work. They try it, and 2 or 3 years later, they find out whether they were successful. It's not like paving a parking lot. It's, there are some other moving parts. So I don't see a way other than going through the whole process again to have you hear more about the details of what they would do under the volleyball courts. That's where you have to take if you accept my way of looking at this, you accept that Bill working with DACO will come to a solution that'll move the ball forward and minimize erosion from the volleyball court area. But if you don't agree that that's likely, then you vote no. And that's the decisions we end up having to make. Blake. I can't hear you. Blake, you're gonna have to unmute. There you are.
Yep. So without knowing exactly what you're talking about, not having seen what the additional plans that the applicant is proposing, but assuming that it does address the concerns of the neighbors and the commissioners that the applicants heard over these past couple of meetings, is there any reason not to just deny the application right now and open up a new public hearing and be able to give them a chance to present what the additional information and allow the residents to weigh in on it?
Well,
In a relatively efficient
no, that's what I was going to say. The answer is yes, you can deny this and tell them to come back with a new proposal, but it's a new proposal. It starts out as notification to the
Sure.
people you notify. And, we
Yeah.
started this in October and we're here halfway through February, and it would be approximately that amount of time again in order to hear further ideas on drainage and anything else they came up with.
Would it really be that long? I mean, if we've already got a head start on everything, it's just the time frame for making the public notifications is really,
If they send us a revised application, we have 65 days to set the hearing date. We
Yep.
could do that in less than 65 days, but not less than about 16 days because we have to notice this in the newspaper at least 2 weeks before. Then you have 35 days for a hearing. If you continue it, it's another 35 days if we need a continuation. And then we get 65 days to make a decision. So you're talking about 2, 3, about 4 months as a minimum.
given what we know, I don't think we would necessarily need the continuation and the 60 days, that's all.
No, I'm saying it's 4 months if you don't do any continuations. Let me also point out to you, we're coming into a very busy period of time in the next 3 or 4 months on short-term rentals. We're going to be talking about that a little later, but we've got public input. When we get that input, it'll be copious and you're going to need time to review that. Be sure this is what you want to devote our time to because it's going to change the timeline on the other things on our agenda. So no, I don't think you can do it expeditiously. You have to meet the statutory timelines, and just because we think we're better informed now than we were, we still have to leave 35 plus 35 plus some part of 65, and that's about 4 months. If we started in a week, we got well, actually it'd be 4 months after the applicant gave us a revised application, and that would take some time for them to do. So it's definitely 4 months minimum plus the time they need. So you're talking about next fall. Having a decision, I mean. Nip.
I agree with Blake. I think the timeframes that you cited, Rick, were the maximum, the limit on when we had to act on something. We could do it in less than that, as long as we were prepared to do that. We could have special meetings. We could do a lot of things to shorten the time frame if we thought that was. I think the one that you spelled out is the worst case scenario. I don't think we have to be covered by that. But anyway, I would suggest we move the discussion forward, and I will make a motion that we deny the application, recognizing that having heard all our concerns, the town may choose to come back with a different application that addresses the concerns that have been addressed, and that we would be willing to, the denial of this application does not foreclose our willingness to consider another application that more adequately addresses our concerns.
Okay, in parliamentary procedure, that's called denial, to move a denial without prejudice so that they can come back with a revised proposal in the future. Is there a second to that? Beth? Okay, discussion on the motion. Blake?
I'll just say I agree with Nip's caveats there, that fully open-minded and optimistic that additional information will make it easier for us to have a decision.
Yeah, just Dana?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I hope that the town understands that what I think we want is the most aggressive application of erosion control that can be mustered for that particular area.
Okay, I'm still tilting at windmills, but I'm going to make this observation because of that comment. If you do a permit approval with conditions, you can specify those things. You can say, we want the most aggressive approach, and let the applicant, who's the expert, and the zoning officer who deals with things like this more than we do, we effectively be the judge and let them work out the details. That's not to sway votes, it's to say that's the process is supposed to work that way. The other comment I would make is I disagree with the contention that those timelines that I gave you are, we can accomplish it much more quickly. We can't. This is contentious and it'll be loaded with technical information. And I already know the people among you who are going to suggest that we hire our own expert, which will take time to bring a person up to speed and to get us to have a working relationship with them. I dealt in government for 33 years. You are proposing something that is going to absorb more, well more than half of our time. And if you try and do it with special meetings, they get in the way of the schedule for special meetings on the issue we've dealt with for the whole community for 2.5 years. Now, I don't want to dismiss the concerns of the residents, but it's for residents. And I would suggest that if we vote this motion down and do it with approval with conditions, yes, that delays a solution for them in the future, but it's not a big future. The conditions can get them working with DEP and the town to try and solve their problem. What we do on this application isn't going to solve their problem. The sand is already there. So please, I'm begging you to just think about what you're doing for the calendar of events and the limited time we have to do the things we have to do. I oppose the motion. Nip.
Rick, I think that's absolutely the wrong priority. I mean, I acknowledge that short-term rentals is very important and will consume a lot of our time, but to short circuit this one because you're concerned about the process on short-term rentals and the impact on more people, I think that's a very poor priority.
Who else had a hand there? Beth? Beth?
Yeah, my concern was just, I don't, as much as I would, I would love to see volleyball continue. I don't want to stop that, but I also don't think it's appropriate to grant an application on a, trust me, you'll like it when you see it approach. I don't think that that is, if somebody were to challenge this on the other side of it, that's not a reason to grant an application. We can't grant an application based on what we don't know. They may have a great plan, but they didn't put it forward in the time that they were supposed to. And for that reason, I just cannot support it. I hope they do come back and I hope they do have a better plan. And I'm certainly willing to look at it with an open mind. But the plan as it was disclosed and discussed does not prevent the problem that has been going on for however many years and will continue to go on until there is a real solid plan in place and there's established, the more grasses are established, better berms are established, all of the drainage issues are complied with, and they've actually got a study about where the sand is going.
Others? Dana, did you? No, you spoke on this, and Nip and Beth and Blake. Okay, everybody spoke on it twice. You're ready for the call the question? Ready to vote? Okay, all those in favor, I'll call you by roll so that we get a voice on the video record of the meeting. Nip Tanner.
Aye.
Dana Oviatt.
Aye.
Beth Steele.
Aye.
Blake Powell.
Aye.
Rick Smith is a no. Okay, 4-1 motion passes, so the permit is denied without prejudice. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the minutes of the January 19th meeting. So you got those over a week ago to review. Any comments on the minutes? You saying goodbye? Good night. All right. Okay, comments, questions, minutes? Seeing none, we'll consider them approved without objection. So the minutes of January 19th are approved. Zoning report for January, you got that also about a week now, 4 or 5 days ago. 6 applications. Fairly standard fare. Any comments on those? Seeing none, that's approved without objection. Let me get my notes up to speed here. Approved. Okay, we're now at old business, the issue of the FEMA language. Larry, can you put that language up, please? It's that draft language from the regulation.
Yeah, I'm looking for it out of the 30 we got on here.
Yeah, there's a bunch.
Esker. What was the title of the
Yeah,
document?
I'm gonna go in there right now and find it for myself so we can,
Oh, FEMA 10-year period revision?
yes. Yep.
Got it. Okay.
All right, and
Share.
okay, this turned out to be quite a simple change because all of the, why are we, there we go, okay. All of the active parts of the ordinance refer to substantial improvement. So the only place that has to be changed is just to change that year in there. So if you agree, that's what we would pursue. It would be a text amendment. So in addition to the schedule I just told you about a minute ago on Esker, you also have another 35-day period because it has to go to 3 different agencies, DEP, the town, and the Southeastern Connecticut Council of Government, and they get 35 days to comment. So we can't schedule a hearing on this at least until 35 days has passed since they receive it. So, and then it starts the same clock. We set an agenda for, we set a hearing. Hearing is 35 days. We won't need an extension on this one, I suspect. And then we get 65 days to make a decision. So is there a motion to start the clock on this language change? Or do you want to discuss it some? Okay, Beth?
I motion we start the clock.
Okay. Okay, this will be something else that will absorb our process during the spring. Would you like to consider starting this after the short-term rental issue is resolved, hopefully in midsummer? Or do you think it's important enough to do right now, superimposed as it will be on now 2 big issues, Esker and short-term rental? Blake?
Well, first I'll second it if that's what Beth was making a motion to do. And if we're having a discussion about it now, I really don't see this as a contentious issue. I mean, it's been out there, people have given us their comments. It doesn't seem to be something that should take up a whole lot of time.
Easy for you to say, my friend.
I fully understand that. And I was gonna ask later how we're doing on finding help for you, Rick.
I'm interviewing someone this week,
Okay,
but it's not the clerical business that is going to tie this in a knot. It's meeting time and chairman's sanity, just so you know. So Beth, your motion is to start the clock as soon as we can
Yes.
to go to hearing as soon as possible. Okay, and that's seconded by Blake. Discussion on the motion.
My only question, I mean, that's the way it's supposed to be, just the parentheses 10 and the capital 2.
That's what Bill says. I ran it past him.
Okay, as long as everyone understands what that means, I'm fine with it.
This is based on what we agreed on, what, 1 or 2 meetings ago, last meeting probably. Again, my issue is not with 10 or 2. We already decided what we're going to pursue. My question is trying to manage the workload on everything. This is a minor issue. It's the process that's going to be required, not whether we're going to get blowback. I don't think anybody's going to come to the hearing and comment, quite frankly, but it still requires interaction with different agencies and hitting deadlines and timelines and things like that, which is not inconsequential. It is from your perspective because you're not doing it, but not from mine. But I'll go with the majority, as I always say.
Well,
Other comments on the, the 2 choices are start it right away or wait until we're done with one or the other of those 2 issues. And since Esker's going to take us to the fall, you would be waiting till summertime sometime if we meet a reasonable schedule for that.
Rick,
Yes? Who-
Dana
Dana?
Oviatt. So what you're saying, as I understand it, is waiting on it would save you some work and hassle. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, there's no point in not doing that. I would advocate waiting on it. It's not a pressing issue.
Okay, others? Nip?
Rick, you mentioned 2 other things. I think we've disposed of the Esker, correct?
I'm assuming they're going to come back with an application that will, once they come back with an application, we don't have any latitude. We have to, when we're the application or the applicant, we set the schedule. But when the town comes back and says, we're giving you this revised proposal that you asked for, they say they give it to us in a month. We have to start the clock. We have to have a hearing within 65 days and start getting those comments. And I can't predict you when they're going to come back. If they don't come back till next October, then we're fine. But if they come back in a month, we've got a problem. So,
Well, it sounds like, Nip Tanner, it sounds like we'd have a 65-day window, or, once they show up, we'd have the earliest that could be is in a month. And then we have 2 months after that. So we have 3 months where the only thing presumably we're dealing with of consequence is short-term rentals. Is that logical?
if they come back in more than a month, we could have a public hearing on this about the same time we'd be having a public hearing on short-term rental. It wouldn't be the same night. But again, you have to get the comment out to those public agencies, and you have to do the newspaper notices, and you have to schedule a hearing and things like that. It's a process. It's this FEMA issue is not going to be a big deal, except for superimposing on other things. I'm not worried about the FEMA thing as much as I'm worried about the 2 other ones. Maybe say it that way. It's better.
Nip Tanner, the
Yeah.
2 other ones, the timeline on the beach is out of our control, as you just outlined.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'm not adverse to Dana's comment. I'm not overwhelmed by the need to avoid dealing with this, but if you would prefer we push it off, we've lived with 10 years for a long time.
Well, we've lived with 10 years for 10 years, essentially. So if we wait 4 months to start the clock, that helps us out a little bit. I'm not
Helps
sure.
you out.
Pardon me? I can't hear you.
It helps you out.
Yes, it does.
I think Dana and I, Blake and I feel, okay, we can handle it.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like we have one for doing it right away and one for waiting till short-term rental is over. Let's put it that way. Not open-ended. I mean, short-term rental becomes another year's worth of effort, then we just ought to take a pause and clean up some of these things like FEMA. But the motion is to do it as soon as possible. So either we revise the motion, amend it on the fly, or you vote up and we do it right away, or you vote down and we pick a different schedule. Those are our choices. Yeah,
Yes, it's my motion. So I would not be adverse to amending my motion.
Okay.
It helps the chair.
you
No,
can
so
do that.
Make a motion that we table it for, 4 months. Is that what you need? I don't know.
Actually, that's a good way of doing it. Except I don't think you can table your own motion.
Okay.
You can change your own motion because
I'll
it's your
change
motion.
my motion.
Change
to-
the motion to start it in July, let's say.
Yes, that's my motion, my amended
Motion.
motion.
Start in July. Is the seconder agree to that? That was Blake? Okay. So the new motion, which is agreed by the mover and the seconder, is to start the process for FEMA in July. Discussion on that revised motion. Seeing none, all those in favor, I'll call it again. Nip?
I,
Yes. Blake?
Aye.
Dana?
I,
Beth?
Aye.
Me, yes. Thank you all. All right, so that is the FEMA issue. Now it's the process for public input on short-term rentals. You saw the draft calendar of events. Is that worthwhile to you? Do you want to put that up on the screen or do you want to not bother? I have some introductory remarks to kind of describe some of what we'll have to go through. And oddly enough, I just described it for Esther, a lot of it. This is a text amendment. So we have to do that consultation with the agencies. Once we start the clock, and it's our clock, we can start it anytime we want. We have 65 days to set the hearing. The hearing is then 35 days long unless we decide to extend it, which, since it's our application, we don't have to ask anybody for permission like we did with Esker. So we can extend it and we can get another 35 days in there if we need it. And then there's 65 days that we have to make a decision. Embedded in there is a period of time that's about 2 weeks before the hearing where we have to do notification to the day. That's the process questions for the formal part of the process. The question for us, first question tonight is, we've talked a number of times about the advisability of having an informal public workshop and whether that would be desirable. To the opportunity it gives us is to hear people and have more latitude to make changes based on the comments we get. We know we're going to get a lot of people that just are going to say, please don't do this. But hopefully we're going to get people that have read the proposal and say, well, if you're going to do this, why don't you do it this way instead of that way? We have a lot of latitude when it's a public workshop to take the results of the workshop and do anything we want to revise our proposal. When we go to formal public hearing, we don't have that latitude. We can approve, we can deny, we can make minor adjustments in a text amendment sense, but we can't make major adjustments because, as John has pointed out to me, people who didn't come to the hearing or didn't comment because they saw the proposal and the proposed form now would feel like the rug was pulled out from under them if we made a major change and they didn't have an opportunity to comment on it. So the value of the workshop is we hear all the best input and we have the most latitude to make a change based on that input. But it does drag the process out. It means we would have a public, based on that calendar, just off the top of my head, we'd be having a public workshop somewhere around the end of March. And then we would be having, then we would take that comment, and I suspect it will be voluminous, and we'd adjust if we wanted to. If we didn't want to adjust anything, we wouldn't, but leave yourself the possibility that you're going to want to make an adjustment, and maybe several. So that'll take some time, some special meetings, and that'll take you in the direction of probably towards the end of April, which means you get to a first possible public hearing, which would be at the end of May, because of all of these deadlines we have to hit. And I ran them past Bill tonight, and he said, yeah, that's kind of the calendar you have to deal with. So if you do the public workshop, you have a public hearing on the end of May. 1st of June is the most likely date because it's a Tuesday, and when you have we know it's going to be more than one night of hearings, so it's nice to have 2 days in a row and just continue to set out to have the hearing on a Tuesday and a Wednesday. So the way I blocked that calendar out was a series of paired dates, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, for public hearings in June. And then you have special meetings to make your decisions. That's as truncated as I can think to make it. So the question is, do you want to do a workshop? And do you agree that a 2-day hearing schedule, set out to do a 2-day hearing schedule, is the right thing to do? So if you don't do that and you just set out one day and you get to the 10:30 at night and a lot of people still want to talk, you don't want to be in that position, because now you have to continue it in a more formal way, and it's a little bit more of a problem. I don't know that you have to go back and no, you don't. You just extend the hearing like we did with Esker, but you don't extend it to the next night. You extend it to a date that you can let people know what the date is. So I would advocate on that one point that, knowing we're going to get a lot of comment, we should just set out 2 days right at the outset, a Tuesday and a Wednesday, or whatever we pick. If you don't need the second day, fine, you don't use it, but have it there ready for you. So sorry, long-winded introduction, but workshop or just public hearing? Nip?
I'm in favor of a workshop. I'm concerned about the risk that we would have the same outcome from a public hearing that we had the last time. We had a public hearing on this, that we will get feedback, strong feedback, that we are concerned that the regulations as we propose them don't address, and then we're stuck again, end up back where we are now. I don't see any downside to having the workshop. Hopefully we'll get the same comments that we would otherwise not hear until the public hearing, and if it leads us to modify our draft, that's a good thing.
Okay. Others? Blake agrees. Dana agrees.
I agree.
Okay. All right. So let's do workshop and take a look at that calendar if you haven't already, and see if it suits you. But tentatively, it would be March 30th. And the reason it has to be that long is we're going to get John and Bill's comments in the first of the month, and you want to give yourself time for a meeting to go over their comments and see if you want to make some changes, and then make the document available to the public well in advance so they have a chance to read it. That's why you burn a month, just by getting ready to do the workshop. So we'll do that. Tentatively March 30th. All right.
Rick?
Second, Blake and then Nip.
Sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump, but so just the format of the workshop, once again, I like the concept. I'm a little unclear on exactly how it's going to be controlled in a efficient manner.
I would, well, actually, that's a point we need to discuss. Doing it in March means we have to do it by Zoom. And the other reason for doing a workshop is it's going to give us a good sense of whether a formal public hearing will be manageable by Zoom or if it just won't be, in which case we'll have to wait till things calm down so we can do it in person. I know people have run public hearings with 100 participants by Zoom and somehow they make it work and we'll see.
I was
I
assuming
would run
by
it like,
Zoom, but I was asking more, is it going to be formatted similar to a public hearing where we
that's
kind
how
of
I would do it.
out and then just get comments, or is it going to be a lot more interactive? I mean, you know, the term workshop is a little different than.
Well, it's not Santa's workshop, so everybody won't be banging hammers on nails, but I would make it more interactive than a public hearing, but I would form it somewhat like a public hearing. Presentation at the beginning so the public knows what we're doing. Walk through, hit key measures without reading the thing verbatim, but hit the key points, and then let them comment. If they have questions, that's fine, but sometimes, you know, I would manage it so that the questions that aren't useful for the purpose of the night, we try and restrain those. In other words, questions that say, why are you guys doing this? I mean, I intend to have something in their hands ahead of time on the website that answers those kind of questions. And they're free to disagree with it, but you know, we don't need to take meeting time to have somebody say, why are you doing this? What we need the meeting time for is, how would you do this differently since you don't like this? Or the other camp, which we'll probably hear from as well, you do like it, but you want it done somewhat differently, stronger, different. I want to maximize the opportunity to get people that have read the document to say, you know, I understand. I'll give you an example. Bruce Avery at the last hearing, actually at one of the public meetings, was really good. I mean, he obviously had read whatever it was we were talking about, and he stepped up and said, you know, I wouldn't do it this way, I'd do it that way. And he had 2 or 3 points that way, and they were useful. I can't tell you what they were or whether we even included them in here, but that's the kind of comment I hope we get. But in a public hearing form.
In a public hearing, people get to say whatever they want to say. And in the workshop, I think I would hope that we could have more control over the subject. In other words, perhaps we could walk through section by section of the proposed regulation or issue by issue, perhaps. But it becomes really ineffective if it's just open mic night and people just say whatever they want to say, and we don't have some strict time constraints and control over the subject.
We'll have to give that some thought. We have 6 weeks to, if you want to do it that way, we need to figure out how to structure it so we introduce it to them in a way that gives us useful comment. You say issue by issue, we can't say that without having a roadmap that tells them, here's what the issues are. Now you talk about that issue. You know, workshops take all different types. I know you're not saying this, and I'm not either. Sometimes you have breakout groups and flip charts and those kind of things. That's not the kind of workshop I'm thinking of.
Yep.
I'm thinking of here's the document. There are 5 major points and a bunch of lesser ones. That's what we think. Here are the 5 points. What's your comments? And I mean, I think that can be very useful if the person is composed and thoughtful and has read the document and is working with us. If people just get up and throw grenades, well, you know, they're entitled, but I would try to minimize that as much as I can in the moderator role, which, by the way, is quite a bit easier on Zoom than it is in a public meeting. So public meeting could be lengthy and somewhat contentious, but it will be hard for it to get out of hand. It'll be my job to try and focus people on giving us constructive suggestions. Beth?
Well, I can't, I mean, along those same lines and with the thought process, maybe we should just open it up for like people to give their comments beforehand, and then we could address them on the Zoom. Kind of like what we did with this Esker Point thing. We all wrote down what our comments were so that we could review them beforehand, and then we discussed them. I think I see where Blake's going, and I share the same concerns. I don't know how. I think there will be people with a lot of people with thoughtful comments, and then there are going to be a lot of people who just want to go on and on and on and on about the same things that they say every time we have this hearing. But if we could kind of put out a notice to say, we're going to please submit your constructive comments, you know, how would you improve this specific, you know, with real suggestions as opposed to general commentary, and submit them by date certain, and then we'd have like a just a regular meeting or something like that after that, where we go through them and then we can debate them. Maybe that would be more efficient. I don't know. It's just a thought.
Okay. Larry? This is, by
Yeah.
the way, for the audience, this is a short-term rental discussion or debate. And since we have, our longstanding rule here is that our two elected alternates engage the debate with us. They do not vote on anything, but that's why you'll see new people commenting, and council agreed that that is a legitimate way to do it. So Larry Dunn.
Yes, thank you. No, I agree, with Blake, and I think you can structure it. I mean, I've been in a number of sessions where you do everything with Q's and A's, right? You're using the chat function. I mean, so there's a number of mechanisms to kind of control it. But the other objective of this session would be educational. So I do think that some structure should be there, and you do it a section at a time. For example, one of the sections might be compliance. Well, this is all great, but how are you going to manage it, right? So, so there might be some information, then say, what are Q's and A's on that? But I do agree that there needs to be a structure to the meeting. There needs to be a limiting of time, and maybe the way to really ratchet it down would be on you type up a question, and then we have a Q&A, or perhaps open it for discussion at the chairman's discretion. But I think we need to work that out ahead of time. And if it's going to be the end of March, that's actually not that far away.
No, it isn't.
And we
That schedule is predicated on me running it like a public hearing, which I've done about 50 of them in my life. I hear the points about using a different structure. Not opposed to it, but it sounds like it's going to take some developmental time, which just push things off. It's about a 10-page document. And I think if people are serious about the subject, and I'm sure many, many people will be, it doesn't take more than a half an hour to read it. And then you start deciding what you want to say about it. So educational, I agree, is, it's informative. The meeting will be informative as much as us getting comments. But I hope, I would just encourage us not to try and build too much process into something where really we're trying to get people to tell us what they think about a 10-page document. It's actually less than that if you take some of the front end mishmash out of it. It's about 8 pages.
Rick?
Yes, who? Lynn, we can't see you.
I know. I logged on without video because I wasn't a participant. And
Okay.
so, that, I think it's distracting. So, but now I can't jump on. It's not letting me. It says you're controlling and keeping me off, but I think that's probably not the case.
It's probably Larry, because I don't see where, um,
There's no limitation, Lynn.
Yeah, so it was probably just because I logged on without video. I should have jumped
Okay.
on and then turned myself off once I got
okay,
on.
well, anyway,
At any rate, one thing that I would like to see, if people get up and they say, well, I don't like this. And I would like us to say to them, then how would you accomplish this goal?
I
And
agree.
so that gives them a better understanding of what we're trying to do and what the criteria need to be.
Okay,
And they may have better ways of doing it. That's fine.
and frankly, that's what I'm looking for in a workshop. I call it a workshop because, that's kind of a zoning term of art, but really, it's just really an informal meeting like the two we had in the fall of 2019, where we sat there and asked people what they thought, and they told us what they thought, and we answered and responded and interacted with them, and I found that useful. So, okay, I had Beth and then Larry and then Lynn, Dana, and Dana has not spoken. And I've spoken too much. So Dana, you got something?
Oh, I'm Dana Oviatt. I'm worried about how the workshop will be handled, but I don't think there's any way that you're going to be able to proceduralize it such that it becomes less of a bitch session, that it might become similar to the workshop. But the advantage of it, as I understand it, is that we have a chance to alter more significantly the regulation if we had a workshop than if we didn't have a workshop. But I'll be thinking about how it could be worked better.
Okay. Nip,
Nick Tanner, one of the concerns I have is that at the workshop, we only get feedback from the people we've been listening to for 2+ years about the things they don't like about what we're trying to do. And the risk that poses for us is having spent a workshop listening to that and then going to a public hearing where we either back off on what we worked very hard to develop, or we go to a public hearing and we hear more of the same. I would really hope we could find a way that the workshop also provided us with feedback from the folks who like what we're trying to do and maybe even think we're not being strict enough. So I personally would hope we hear from two sides on the question, not just the ones that we could almost write the script for at this point.
I always jump in to take the opportunity when it arises to agree with Nip. And this is one of those times. I do want to offer a caution then, because I don't know who all the different people are who are listening in on this. And I'm sure there's a feeling out there that a lot of people feel we haven't listened to them in 2 years, for 2 years, because we have religiously said, no, it's a business meeting, there's no public comment. And they've been patient, frankly. You can even see the emails have dropped off. It doesn't mean people that are going to be opposed to this aren't paying attention, but they've been patiently waiting for us to give them the opportunity to speak, which is another reason that the workshop is so important. Having said that, where I agree with you and why I want to use a couple of vehicles to get the word out is I don't want to set the stage for just the people who have a concern about the ordinance, the proposal, and come to tell us don't do it because whatever reason they don't like it. And we don't get views from the so-called silent majority who may have an opinion, but they haven't paid as close attention, either because it's not a financial thing for them, or they've never been exposed to being living next door to somebody who ran a short-term rental and didn't do a very good job of it. That's why I want to get something out in writing to everyone on the Noank mailing list that says, here's what we're trying to do. Here's why we think we ought to do it. Whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it, please pay attention, come to the hearing, read the documents. And then if you want to make your views known, we want to hear from you, whether you're in support or against. But I want to get them both in there. That's where I agree with you. So, and not only with a document that goes out by email, I want to put something on our OneDrive accessible to anyone who, you know, gets the email link, that they can log on and they can see some of the things that support why we're proposing this. So, so I agree with you. Other people. We're all right, so we've agreed we're going to do a workshop. It'll be around the end of March. I will use that draft and preliminary draft not for public disclosure vehicle to try and give you the opportunity to contribute to whatever goes out as public information documents ahead of time. I mean, I can think of three things: an email to everyone in Noank, something on the website that's supporting documents like we have for meetings, and then a hearing introduction so that the people who actually attend hear similar types of information. Here's what we're proposing. Here's why we think it's important. Maybe answer some of the predominant questions that have arisen, maybe not. Maybe we do those in a different way. If it's a workshop, though, maybe we're probably going to get questions from people that say, what are you doing it for in this way? And the number of those that we can address in writing ahead of time, I think is an advantage to them, and it's an advantage to us because we don't take scarce airtime to answer those things. So, is there any more discussion on this, the calendar issue or the public input issue? Dana?
Can I just add one more tiny concern? And as far as the administration of the Zoom meeting during the workshop, do we need to think about that at all, or we're set? I mean, how many people might attend? 50, 60, 70? Do we need to think about the numbers in terms of how we operate Zoom? I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah. Larry's had more experience with this than I have, so I'm going to ask him if he's got ideas on that.
Yeah, Larry Dunn. We can handle 500, which I don't think is an issue. So it's not the number of people, which is why one has to control it and force the mute function and line up people. So, you know, having people raise their hand. I mean, so we're gonna have to be more mechanical about it. So you got a good point. With that many people, you know, you got to say, raise your hand, then we got to keep track of it and then start ticking off the hands, keep a clock on it, et cetera. So it is functional. I wouldn't go the webinar route because that doesn't allow for interaction. So that defaults to the mode we're now in now, except, you know, providing the controls from the host to manage and not manage folks, you know, locking out the microphone unless someone is recognized. So yeah, there are some things, but it's doable. It does get a little messy. Usually you don't have a lot of videos except for the person talking, for example.
Okay.
I don't know, does that answer your question, Dana?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the only reason I thought it was because my my daughter, for her school in New York City, serves as an administrator, which, as I understand it, takes the load off the person who's running the meeting, Rick. And I wondered if that rang a bell with anybody.
Yeah, well, like I said, managing the people who raise their hands, managing the clock, that's administrative functions, which is going to take more energy than what we're doing now with only, 13 people on the call. So yeah, it's a concern, and we've got to work through the mechanisms on how to do that ahead of time.
If 500 people show up, somebody please put me out of my misery.
I'm just saying capability.
Yeah. Nip.
Uh,
Yep.
Nip Tanner, one part of the administration we might think about is what we did for the Ford's hearings. We asked people at the beginning, in this case, we might ask them to do it in advance, to sign up to speak, either pro or con. And then we went through the list sequentially based on when they signed up. So you start with a list of people who've committed ahead of time that they want to speak. And if you choose, you can either alternate pro or con, or you can do all the pros and then all the cons. And then after everybody who signed up is done, then you'd say, okay, is there anybody else? And in the Ford's hearings, there were a few, but most of the people who spoke were people who had indicated ahead of time that they wanted to, and we knew basically which camp they were in. And it just made it a lot easier to run the whole thing.
Okay, this is a bonus night because twice in this meeting I have agreed with Nip. Actually, when
I'm going to sign off now.
Yeah, quit while you're ahead. Yeah. No, I agree. And my view of when I thought about that myself was very similar. I would block out a certain amount of time for maybe 6 or 8 people in favor sequentially. They each get 4 minutes or whatever time we allot. And then 6 or 8 of the other camp, and then take 1 for, 1 against, 1 for, 1 against. I never did like it in some hearings I've attended where people in favor of an application, like a monstrous design thing, between attorneys' time, which seems to be unlimited, and then people in favor of the application. Well, for the people who are opposed, by the time that, it's 11:30 at night, they're weary and they've lost their urge. I think that's very unfair, whichever camp is first. So I would go for balance myself. And particularly in the workshop, we can set any kind of rules we want for that. And it gives us a trial and error period to see how it works. So I agree. Thank you. Others? Like?
Just that I think that concept would be better if instead of just generalities of pros and cons, if it was limited to specific aspects. We had a discussion pro and con of the parking, the way it's worded in our regulations, what people think about that, or of the different types of permits or whatever.
So you have an issue, who's in favor, speak, who's opposed, speak, go back and forth a few times, set out a certain amount of time for that block, and then go to whatever, apartments or whatever the next issue is. That's what you're suggesting.
I think that would be more meaningful. We'd get more
Okay.
out of the workshop.
Right. Okay, others? Okay. Next, is there any new business anybody has? Okay, before we adjourn, next meeting will be March 4th. We'll hear from John and Bill on their views. We'll get a written document in advance, and that will be distributed to commissioners as a attorney-client type of document. But before we have that meeting on March 4th, I will have the information up on the OneDrive, the website, so that the public has the opportunity to see what the advice is. Unless, and I haven't heard this yet, if we get feedback that suggests we should treat it as an attorney-client privileged document, I don't know why that would happen, and it hasn't been discussed. That would be the only reason I wouldn't put it up for public inspection. My general reaction is anything we get after we're assured that there are no errors or misinformed types of pieces in there, then we should make it available to the public. They're going to see it eventually anyway, and the sooner we do that for their benefit, the better the process is. So that's generally how I see the next leading up to the couple of weeks going. Any comment on that? Larry?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between attorney's advice and a document that has been crafted as a result of that advice. So I think the former is privileged, but the latter should be public.
Yeah, and I agree, and it will be, Rick Smith, it will be.
All right.
Yeah. I'm just leaving him the opportunity to say, these three things we should talk about, in a privilege mode. And I don't know if he will. Like I say, I haven't had that discussion. Just leaving him the opportunity to say that if he so chooses. But otherwise, I think what we get from him should be available to the public. It's going to be very informative to us, I think, as to whether we proceed on every point that we've agreed on, or whether we decide that we need to regroup on one or another issue. But we won't know that till we see the type of comments we receive. Okay. Gosh darn it, we're good. 23 minutes before 9 o'clock. Unless there's other business, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Larry? You're muted.
Sorry.
Yeah.
As part of leading up to the first meeting, the workshop, would you support a newspaper article that advertises, provide a link to the OneDrive, et cetera, et cetera?
No, I don't think so. Here's why. This is a Noank issue. It may be of interest to other people, but it fundamentally is a Noank issue, which is why I want to use that email list that the executive committee staff used to get word out on everything from trash to everything else. Excuse me, everything else. I don't know that there's a value to us trying to make a reasonable decision to broadcasting it in a newspaper. Having said that, if people find out about it, they hear about it word of mouth, more the merrier, get on and listen. But I thought about that. I thought long and hard whether a op-ed type of thing would be useful. And I just thought Noank benefits better if the people who have expressed interest in the subject of Noank get it as an email, and then they can participate or not as they see fit. But will of the majority. Blake, you just moved documents, but you okay. Your light lit up. I didn't know if you wanted to speak. Okay. Any other comments?
There's one application for a secretary?
Yeah. Like pulling teeth. Well, part of it is we don't pay a whole lot, but it's the pay scale that permeates all of the different staff members. So if you jack one up, you cause a problem in 3 or 4 different places. So we don't want to do that. And I've spoken a bit to this woman and read her resume, and she seems like she would be well suited to it. But I'll know more once we have the interview. So we'll see. Is there a motion to adjourn if there's not other business?
I move.
Blake moved to adjourn, and who was the second? Beth? Okay, to adjourn. All those in favor, wave your hand. I won't even call the roll on that. It's unanimous. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rick.
Enjoy the 20 minutes of free time on